Good morning, YouTube. Warbles on a lot here with the dag end of the round table discussion on the 12th of March.
2008 election, and he was a very strong leader. And really, when you look at the Liberal Parliamentary Party, there was certainly no one with as much experience as Colin. He served Western Australia well for 2 terms. I think the time factor has played a significant part in the result of this election. But nevertheless, the Liberal Party has had an absolute thumping in this election.
Yeah, Jeff, former student of Oxford, of course, you'd be very well aware of Enoch Powell, the maverick British Tory. He once said that all political careers end in failure. Not many politicians defy the Powell doctrine, although you did. You retired on top at a time of your choosing. Question, why did Barnett succumb to hubris? It's a fascinating issue. It's you know, that, you know, he'd served his party with great distinction. There's no question about that. I do sincerely believe that the economic strategy he had was incorrect for the state in the time that he was there, and the chickens came home to roost at this election. But, you know, it's an amazing... John Howard's in the same category, Tom. In this exactly I've just read Tiffin's new book, Disposable Leaders. Outstanding. And John Howard knew he was going to lose. He said he knew he was going to lose. But he still, even his own seat, but he still didn't transfer over to Peter Costello. Colin Barnett last night was saying, you know, we all knew it was on, and we had Matthias Cormann on this morning as well saying a similar thing. Well, if you all knew that was going to happen and you're responsible for your own party, you should do something about it.
Yes, I get your point, though. Martin, it was always going to be tough to win 3 elections on the trot, right, especially at the end of the mining boom.
Yeah, and what people may not realise, in other parts of Australia, there were long terms. Alan Carpenter went early and had a fixed term legislation, which meant the first term was 4.5 years, and then we had another 4 years. So we're talking 8.5 years, which are longer than 2 terms normally are. And he saw 5 prime ministers come and go during his time. And so I think that its time factor was really marked. And that parallel with John Howard, I think that's fairly realistic. He should have retired last year, and he could have retired at the absolute peak, and he would have gone out in style. So, you know, it's a bit of a shame for him personally.
The public policy wonks will look at this and they'll say this has been a real disaster for economic reform and privatisation. Katie, I mean, Barnett did campaign to partially sell the WA power network, and we should stress it wasn't just the Labor Party that ran a hard campaign against the state's $40 billion debt sale. There was a One Nation party. I mean, they were railing against this as well. So the question here is, how unpopular is economic reform now in the West?
Well, clearly the election results show that it's a very unpopular policy to take to the election. It would have been a policy that probably should have been taken to the people well in their first term. That being said, I don't think that it's a likelihood for a long time. I think Western Australia has also suffered with the GST distribution, and I think that really needs serious hard look at, as we've all been complaining we don't get a fair share of GST in this state. And yes, as I said before, I think the post-mortem there'll be a lot of soul searching, and I commiserate with all of those members that have lost their seats. And yes, it's a sad day for the Liberal Party.
Yeah, Jeff, the polls, for a change, were right.
Well, they were spot on. And Tom, do you notice also that Labor's primary vote, 42%. Now, I think that's the figure that the Federal Liberal Party will be focused on. There was a bit of a return to the 2-party system here. It was us or them. And in this case, Labor came out on top. But can I just question the use of the term economic reform in relation to privatisation? Privatisation in and of itself is not an economic reform. It's a change that may or may not create better productivity in your community. The one thing we do know about it, we've had lots and lots of it in Australia over a long period of time, and it hasn't produced a public benefit sufficient to convince the people that it's a good thing. And we need economic reform. If productivity is stagnant, we need to deal with that in the nation. But just to assume flogging things off is economic reform, that's the mistake of too many Liberals in this country, and it's why they're in a mess politically.
Well, thank you to all 3 of you this morning. It's been terrific having you on the program. Jeff Gallup, Katie Hodson-Thomas and Martin Drum, thanks so much for being on RN this morning.
Thanks very much, and great to hear you, Katie, too. All the best.
Yeah, and you too, Jeff. Nice to hear your dulcet tones again, and to Martin as well.
Okay, well, listen, the
Thanks,
tributes,
Katie. Thanks, Jeff.
the tributes
Thanks, Tom.
thank you very much to all. Now, the tributes to Bill Leake have been coming from all quarters, and you can add mine to the list. I worked with Bill at the Australian's opinion pages for the best part of a decade, and I think it's fair to say Bill distinguished himself not just as a fearless and beautiful artist, we all know that. He had a sense of humour, he had no respect for hypocrisy or privilege. But I think it's also important to note he upset, he outraged all sides in the political and cultural debates. From 96 to 2007, let's be frank, he was the darling of the Howard-hating left. I remember being at the Australian newspaper and all the subs, most of them were old lefties, loved him for bagging Howard, comparing him to Hitler. But of course, during more recent times, Bill was lionised by many on the right. Indeed, he was the hero of those who wanted to repeal the 18C, Section 18C. So whatever your views are of Bill Leake, he made a long, distinguished career out of offence, and that's how he'll want to be remembered. And by the way, did you know that Bill Leake once presented an evening show here on RN, along with Libby Gore? It was called The Night Club. It was about 15 years ago. Bill Leake died on Friday at the age of 61. Well, look, I hope you've enjoyed the show this week. You can find all our stories on the Sunday Extra website or via the ABC radio app. The minefield is coming up after the news.
Yeah, Bill Leake's dead. Yay team. He may well have been the darling of the Howard-hating lefties once upon a time back in the day. I don't remember him that way. My recollection of Bill Leake is that he was once upon a time a fairly neutral cartooner who was pretty funny. He didn't seem to favour one side or the other. And then, probably for the last 10 years, he's been increasingly prominently allied with the White-Blindfold view of Australian history. That business about Section 18C of the Anti-Discrimination Act. Somebody took him to court because he put out a cartoon which the Australian published at Rupert Murdoch's expense, subsidised by the American commercial media industry, because that's how the Australian newspaper stays afloat. Dear old darling Rupert siphons money out of the excited states to keep the right wing of Australia on a drip feed. So anyway, Bill Leake put a cartoon in the Australian, or they put his cartoon in their newspaper, and it depicted an Aboriginal man who allegedly didn't know what his son's name was, and the bung-hating, white-bread, redneck, bogan, Euro peon sector of the Australian community that exists. It's out there, you know, like they consider that it was a really bad idea to stop counting Aborigines with the wildlife and give them full citizenship. And they think it was a bad idea because they don't think Aborigines deserve full citizenship because they consider they were just rootless, homeless savages. Bit sad for them that the geneticists have just come up with absolute ironclad hair sample DNA studies that indicate that maybe 60,000 years ago, maybe 50,000 years ago, this bunch of deontologists are leaning towards 50,000 years ago, Aborigines came to Australia from the north and they arrived just south of where New Guinea is now, and they went in two waves down the east and west coast, spread out, followed the coastline. Took them about 1,000 years to meet in the middle down near where Victoria meets South Australia. And they settled in those locations and they stayed there for 50,000 years. They didn't ever move away because there was an ice age. They just stayed there. They had their country. They have their connection to the country. They are evolutionarily designed and epigenetically fine-tuned and selected to live on their country. They didn't fuck it up and run away like the harvest everythingists had to do after they turned the food forest at Göbekli Tepe into a bloody desert. 10,300 years ago, the grain at the bottom of the midden at Göbekli Tepe was all wild harvested. 300 years later, the grain going into the midden was hybrid varieties. The hunter-gatherers who'd been feeding the stonemasons who were building the beautiful bas-relief stone circle of T-shaped monoliths, they couldn't keep the food up to the stonemasons by harvesting wild grain and wild animals. So the first thing they did was they domesticated the grain, and they started clearing the land, and they became the prototype, archetypal broadacre agro-cultists. They invented agriculture to feed their religious artisans who were building the temple for whatever ceremonies they wanted to conduct. After they turned it into a desert, the survivors were so mightily impressed by what their ancestors had done that they covered the place up with sand and grew grass on it. And, eventually the erosion brought on by global warming got to it, surrounding deforestation and wind changes and weather pattern differentials. And some goat farmer saw this corner of a prism-shaped rectangular block sticking out of his sandhill, called the archaeologists, and they found Göbekli Tepe, the oldest agricultural site known to archaeology. Turned lots of theories upside down. But, wherever you stand or sit or exist on Australia, be aware that when what became Turkeys, the Turkish people of Göbekli Tepe, when they invented harvest everythingism, right where you are, there were Aborigines whose family had been living there for 40,000 years already. So, isn't it a good thing that Bill Leake's dead? He died at 61. That means Australia's been saved probably 15 or 20 years worth of vicious, excoriating, racist cartoons, bolstering the beliefs of the bogans who think blackfellas were the savages. No. The savages turned up with the guns and the germs and the steel. The barbarians won that round. They conquered the continent. Everything they've touched since 1788, they've fucked. Put the topsoil at the bottom of the ocean, fed the food plants to their bloody livestock, cut down the trees, switched off the rainfall pump, filled up the rivers with topsoil after they caught all the fish in them, then they caught all the fish in the ocean. Now they've warmed up the ocean, so the fucking barrier reef's being bleached for the 4th time in 4 years. Maybe it's the 3rd time in 4 years. It bleached last year, it's bleaching again. 4 years ago it bleached. Yeah, 3rd time in 4 years. It's difficult to think of anything they've done that was a good outcome, really, in the long run, looked at from the survivability of humanity existing on the continent, of maintaining a biosphere in harmony with what weather there is. Yeah, the barbarians won, and Bill Leake's no longer alive to make cartoons about it, so God's in his heaven, obviously. Everything's under control. I'm going to have a sip of coffee. And Pauline Hanson went from 13% expected vote down to 8% expected vote when she allied with the Liberal Party. And then she said that vaccines were a bad idea. And then she got almost 5% turnout in Western Australia, where everybody wanted to have a protest vote. So maybe Islamophobia is past its peak in Australia, like maybe the fact that Tronald Dump is the prissy dunce in the excited states of Norte Americano and they've elected a fucking infantile imbecile and given him the biggest stash of nuclear weapons on the planet. Maybe that's sort of made people in Australia realise that, well, if he's an Islamophobic fanatical Fruit Loop, maybe we don't want to be like that because, you got to be a fucking idiot to think like Tronald Dump. This is the dawning of the age of the Trumpletons. The age of the Trumpletons. and all the Trumpletons will be trampled on by global warming, which will crush Trottle Dump. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.